Hi, and welcome to another episode of Immigrant Success Canada's podcast, your coaching program for a successful and happy life in Canada for the next 20, 25 years and 125 years. My name, co-founder and co-host of this podcast is Emmanuel Petrescu, and I have my partner Charlie.
Hi everyone, I'm Charlie back.
And today we have again as a guest Alana McIntyre. Hi, Alana.
Hi, Emmanuel.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on our show second time. Before we start this podcast episode, Charlie, would you like to tell our audience a little bit about our program, who we are, and what do we do?
Absolutely. Basically, we are helping new immigrants to be successful and happy in Canada through our unique coaching program for their long term success for the next 20 years. So, if you want to know more about our program, please visit our website isc-go.com.
That's great. Part of our effort to help newcomers is to create podcast episodes such as this, where we have successful people from Canada in Canada. And today's subject is role of private tutoring for an immigrant's English communication skills.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So I will lead this discussion with Elena. So, as an immigrant, when I first immigrated into Canada, I thought that my English is great, but actually that was not the case. So I learned a lot from Elena through her private coaching, and I believe that communication skill, especially in English, is extremely important when you pursue your career or uh, doing your own business. So today, we'd like to hear from Elena, who is an expert on speech therapy and also have a lot of experience in coaching and teaching English communication. So my first question is, for new immigrants, what kind of advice can you give them, especially in English communication, which is second language for them? So, what kind of differences and how they can improve their English communication in Canada?
Thank you, Charlie. I would say, as a speech language pathologist, or as some people would know me as a speech therapist, I probably have a very different approach to things um, than, say, like not a language tutor, but a tutor you think of as helping you through school. Speech language pathologists do some training on accent reduction therapy, but I think that that's only one aspect of communication. There's the accent reduction, which is, Charlie, you had no R's when I met you. H's were missing, but you're awesome now. Um, there's also vocabulary and grammar, which, changes depending on where you are and the type of what you want to say. So, what's in your head, necessarily grammar isn't always the way that we would say it. And then finally, I think there's the social pragmatic piece, which is the social skills, the different way in which we address each other or what things we can and can't speak about on a day-to-day basis, both at work and in person and personally with friends that make communication different when you're coming from another country. So I think, first of all, those are three things that we need to look at. We can't just think about pronunciation, which is what we tend to go for when we think accent, right? But that's not always the most important part. It's part of the whole thing. So I would say the biggest thing that you can do as an immigrant is practice, practice, practice.
Always.
The more you speak, the better you get. Obviously, speaking to somebody who's going to give you feedback is going to be much more beneficial than just speaking to yourself. But practicing is probably the best thing you can possibly do. Putting yourself in situations where you have to speak English and you have to be understood, getting out there, learning the vocabulary, just doing it. That's the best possible thing you can do. I would say another thing you can do is listen to English radio and watch English TV or French or whatever. In Canada, we have English and French. We're speaking about English right now, but if you were moving to, say, Quebec, you would want to do these things for French. But definitely reading English newspapers or websites, listening to English speakers on TV, radio. Those are going to be really important for just listening for the vocabulary, the dialect, and just getting used to understanding fast speaking English people because most people don't speak very slowly. And so it's much harder to understand. I think another thing you can do is have somebody that you can have conversations with, make a friend. Because practicing English is great, but they're going to kind of giggle with you. So, like, I have a friend who's from Germany, and we have lots of laughs talking about me trying to learn German and her trying to learn English. And it's some of our best times, but it's a great way to learn another language, and really develop that skill and have fun, right? Because the more fun you're having, the more you're going to keep in your head. You're going to remember those things. And then I think the last area is really use your resources. So there are a lot of language learning apps on, on the internet, on your phone that you can use. You can use Google Translate if you want, but that's kind of cheating. Try and figure it out yourself. And practice with as many people you can in as many situations as you can. That's the best thing you can do.
Okay, so that's great. And now I'd like to talk about culture in English communication. So Elena noticed that I made a lot of mistake in my communication. So there is some delicate English communications which immigrants usually don't understand and so make mistakes. So could you give us some examples and so could you elaborate what it means, culture in English communication?
Okay, so I think that it's going to be very different depending on what culture you come from. So a Spanish culture is going to have very different communication styles than, say, a Korean culture. The Korean culture is much more structured, right? From what I hear from you, Charlie, it's very structured. It's very, you have certain ways in which you address people. You never call them by their first name, things like that. Okay. Whereas in the Spanish culture, it's much more relaxed, more loving. That's the idea we have anyway. So there's a different approach. Canadian culture is probably a mixture of both. So there are times when you have to be structured, but there's different approaches to it. So at a workplace, you're not going to call somebody Mr., except probably the first time you meet them. It's always going to be their first name. And just knowing these little tiny cultural changes or differences makes a big difference in how you are approached. So if you're very formal in Canada, people will see you as standoffish, not approachable, difficult. They might call you difficult. They might think you're being, well, they might think that you're being disagreeable because you're being so structured and they just want to have a conversation, right?
Actually, I can give you one example. So when I first came to Canada and when I have a dialogue or conversation with you, usually here Canadians talk the conversation beginning with some talking about weather or light stuff, right? But for me, in my culture, we go to directly to business, right? When we meet again, let's talk about business and then talk. So that was one example, right?
Yes. And if you go right to business, people are going to think you're very unfriendly, right? And that you're not approachable, and maybe they don't want to be around you very much. And so it really, really, especially if you're starting a new business, it's going to really put a damper on your ability to network well. So understanding that cultural communication piece is very, very important. And I think the other thing too, Charlie, is here in Canada, we have a lot of different cultures, right? You have to be open and willing to change your mode of communication to meet each person's different culture.
It's impossible. There are too many diverse group of people here, right?
It is so true, though. You know, we here in Canada, we talk about respecting everyone, and that means changing to suit or helping people understand. And so if you're just very formal and you're just right to the point, that's not going to work very well here.
I want to add a follow-up question on that about the mental impact about language and accents. Why I'm saying that, myself included, and many newcomers can get intimidated, especially in a Java environment, and or at least in the first 6 months to a year, 2 years or so, but by a native English speaker. What are your thoughts on that, and what would you say to a newcomer?
To make them feel more comfortable.
That's the yes.
I think that you have to take that on as a responsibility for yourself. So you have to self-advocate, because English speakers or Canadians they don't want to cause you to be uncomfortable. I mean, we said Canada's the sorry culture, right? We're always saying sorry for everything. We do not want to make you feel uncomfortable. The problem is that we don't always see it from your perspective, but we're pretty open to hearing that perspective. So I think as a newcomer, you have to tell people what you need. I need you to speak a little slower, please. You know, I'm getting it. And then repeat back what you've understood to make sure, summarize to make sure that you've gotten the main points. And I think that that's really important, because I think it helps the English speaker realize how much you do get if you're given the time to process it.
Yeah, and another thing is some cultures when they talk, they get too close. But in Canadian culture, maintaining some space is very important when you talk, and so being too close is not really a good thing. So I think you need to remember that. And another thing I like to mention is that uh, when you go to job interviews, especially for senior positions, I think you need to have good communication skills. So as Elena told me that, because in my culture, I'm very rigid and very structured. So it is not very good. So can you elaborate about that, Elena, and for other people like me? And then, so how can I just memorize everything and then repeating like a
Yeah.
robot? So right, that's the kind of thing.
So what you bring to my mind, Charlie, is when I first met you and we were practicing job interview skills. And Charlie had this resume. It was the same resume he gave for every single job. It didn't matter what the job was asking for. And then you too. And then we would practice these questions, like questions for an interview. And it wouldn't matter what question I asked, he gave me this like boxed answer. But that doesn't work. Like, he would try and fit it in, but it just doesn't work. You really have to speak from the heart. That's what Canadian businesses want. They want to know. Canadian businesses want to hire somebody who's got skill. But I guess the point is that there's lots of skill and they want to hire a person. And so you're going to get in a Canadian interview people asking about your family and like what's important to you. What do you like to do in your free time? Like things that perhaps, you don't necessarily talk about in a job interview in other countries. But here we hire a person and we want to know you like a person.
Yeah, that's a great point because through the interview, the interviewers want to know what kind of person you are, right? On top of skills, because they want to know soft skills, right? Not just the
Yes.
hard skills, not just your accounting or digital marketing expertise. They want to know how you are inclusive and collaborative, working together, right? And then what are your values and those things. So as a whole, what kind of person you are. That's we have to
Yeah, so
represent.
it's normal in a Canadian interview to be asked a question like, who is the person you most respect in your life and why? Okay. That has nothing to do with the job at hand.
I got asked that question myself.
You did get asked that question. Yes. That's a very typical question. We ask that question in our interviews. I think that it reflects, as Charlie said, the soft skills, the values of a person. And those are really important to Canadian employers. And I think the reason that they're important is because we work so hard to build strong culture within our companies, places where people feel comfortable. And if they don't think you're going to fit in that culture, then they don't hire you, even if you have the skill. And that's probably a little bit hard when you're coming in as an immigrant with a second language to really put forward, the best picture of who you are as a person.
Yeah. So it takes time, and that's why we prepared this podcast, because it takes time. Okay, you cannot learn this culture and all those things just over a couple of months. It takes years, so you have to be patient and learn continuously.
And I think that Canadians and Canadian employers, if we're talking employers mostly here, appreciate when somebody can self advocate and recognize that they need a little bit more time. I think that that's an amazing value to put forward. So to say within an interview, will you speak a little slower, please, and just give me a bit of time, and I will provide you with a really great answer. And feel confident. People love people who are confident in interviews.
And also, I learned one thing in Canada, which is in my culture in Korea, uh, we do everything really fast. So we say, go fast, right? But in Canada, it takes time. I learned that. So Canadians value both process and outcomes. Okay, so we have to enjoy and do it both process and outcomes. When I was in Korea, I was very motivated achieving outcomes, result as soon as possible, right? But in a Canadian culture, I learned this, so we have to enjoy both of them.
And it's about finding everyone's perspective in
Yeah.
Canada. And that's communication as well. Like we like to take in other people's perspectives and always take the account of those things.
Yeah, that's the beauty of Canada. So I think that's great. So lastly, Elena, do you have any other things you like to comment on this topic?
Well, if we're talking about how to improve communication, we talked about the ways in which you can do that independently. I think that the biggest things are making sure that if you can afford to hire someone like a speech language pathologist who can help you and direct you in the right way. I think that that's very, very beneficial. I think making sure that you're watching TV, radio, video, and reading, making sure you're doing as much reading and writing as possible, and then having someone that you can really depend on to practice with. I think those are the three biggest things that I would say you need to come away from in order to really improve English communication. And I think we have to really think about it as communication and not accent, which is, I think, what people get stuck on.
And
Awesome. I really appreciate your
the
for your
drop
talk
links
today.
to where people can find you, Alana, and more information about you. And probably this is a good time to make an announcement that if you don't want to be like me and Charlie to have the same resume for all the jobs, it's probably a good idea to reach out to visit our website at isc.go.com and get more information about what our program does and how does it help you be successful and also happy. In Canada, we have a coaching program that's divided into 5 parts, and we've covered that in the past. But Charlie, do you want to mention just a little bit our 5 modules?
Okay, so in our program, we have 5 modules. And the first one is self assessment, whether you are good fit for immigration. Second module is education. And third module is work and life balance. And the fourth module is the natural beauty of Canada. And the last and fifth module is developing your action plan for the next 20 years. So we have 5 modules in our program. So by visiting our website, you can find out the more details.
Thank you so much for watching us, and Alana, thank you so much for being a guest. I hope you'll come and visit us again.
Of course, Manuel.
Include, as said, links to where people can reach out to on our website, where you can find this recording alongside with the transcript, the other episodes as well. Until next time.